9 experienced hikers, the elite of their generation, entered the frozen, unforgiving wilderness of the Soviet Ural Mountains in the dead of winter. They sought challenge. They sought adventure. None of them returned. When the search teams finally reached the desolate ridge they called Kholat Syakhl, what they discovered defied all logic and shredded the boundaries of rational thought. A tent, the very bastion of their survival, was found shredded, not from the outside, but violently ripped open from within. Their bodies were discovered scattered across the snow in a silent, horrific tableau. Some were half-dressed against the savage cold. Some bore injuries of incomprehensible violence, crushed bones, fractured skulls. Some of their clothes registered traces of inexplicable radiation. There were no signs of a struggle, no trails of blood, no evidence of another human presence. Just a silent, white mountain, and an incident so profoundly terrifying, so utterly devoid of explanation, that it forced the powerful Soviet government to classify and seal the entire case for decades. This is the chilling, enduring story of the Dyatlov Pass incident, one of the most disturbing and deeply contested unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. Welcome to The Shadowed Record. Part 1. The Journey Begins, the Ambition of the Elite. The year is 1959. The place, Sverdlovsk, deep within the heart of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. The nation was gripped by a powerful collective ambition, a drive for scientific excellence, athletic prowess, and the conquest of the natural world. The 9 members of this expedition were the living embodiment of that spirit. All were students or graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute, highly skilled skiers and seasoned adventurers, qualified for the most demanding winter tracks. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, was a brilliant 23-year-old engineering student known for his relentless discipline, meticulous planning, and calm authority. His goal, to lead his team on a challenging, Grade 3, 10-day route through the northern Urals, culminating in a climb of Mount Ortorten. The success of this climb would earn them the highest possible certification for ski tourists. Among the team were the quiet strength of Zina Kolmogorova, the heart and unofficial medic of the team, the burly athlete Rustem Slobodin, the seemingly fearless Ludmila Dubinina, the only female member with an unshakable reputation for toughness, and the oldest member, the mysterious Semyon Zolotaryov, a military veteran and late addition to the group, whose reasons for joining a student expedition remained somewhat ambiguous. They were equipped with the best gear the era could afford: heavy fur-lined boots, wool and canvas cold-weather clothing, and a detailed map and compass set. Crucially, they carried multiple cameras and kept detailed diaries, documenting every kilometer, meal, and every joke. They laughed, they sang, their spirits were undeniably high. On January 28th, they began their ascent from the final settlement. A 10th member, Yuri Yudin, turned back due to illness. A twist of fate, a common cold that saved his life and would forever bind him to the mystery. Dyatlov had promised to send a telegram upon their return to Vizhai by February 12th. Their last dispatch, a final, playful entry in a shared diary, spoke of simple pleasures: a stove, a tent, a meal of dried biscuits, and tea. Little did they know that the photographs they were developing in the lantern light, the final cheerful entries scrawled in their notebooks, would not be cherished memories of triumph, but critical, chilling pieces of evidence in a criminal investigation. They were marching straight toward the summit of a mountain the indigenous Mansi people had named Kholat Syakhl, in their native tongue, the Mountain of the Dead. Part 2. The Final Campsite. A Fatal Error. By February 1, 1959, the expedition was fighting a ferocious headwind. The temperature had plummeted, exacerbated by a biting 30-degree below zero wind chill that scoured the mountainous landscape. Igor Dyatlov, despite his meticulous nature, made an inexplicable error. Due to poor visibility and mounting fatigue, he steered the team off their intended path, missing the protective cover of the forest below. Instead, he made the executive decision to set up camp directly on the open, exposed slope of Kholat Syakhl, approximately 500 meters from the ridgeline. It was a risky, almost amateur choice for hikers of their caliber. Setting up a large 9-person tent on a steep slope exposed to the full force of the gale was a survival paradox. But time was pressing, darkness was falling, and the team had worked hard. Their final surviving photograph, developed much later, shows the hikers clearing snow, anchoring the long tent with skis and poles, and beginning the routine of preparing their evening meal. The last journal entries reflect a normal end to a difficult day. The stove was lit, conversation was likely muted, focused on the immediate tasks of survival and securing the night ahead. Dinner time was estimated to be between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. Forensic evidence later suggested the meal was interrupted. The hikers had cut and half-eaten smoked meat, but the final portion of their dinner, perhaps a kettle of water, remained untouched. At some point between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m., the calm of that routine campsite shattered. A force, unseen, unheard, and unknown, descended upon the mountain of the dead. Part 4. The Night of Terror and the Unspeakable Discovery. The telegram Dyatlov promised never arrived. On February 20th, with no word from the group, a formal search operation was launched. Relatives, students, military personnel, and rescue workers scoured the desolate landscape. On February 26th, the first critical discovery was made: the tent. What the searchers found was not the scene of a gradual tragedy, but of immediate, desperate terror. The tent itself was severely damaged, ripped open across the canvas. Crucially, the tears originated from the inside, a frantic effort to escape rather than an attack from the exterior. Inside, investigators found all the hikers' gear: thick winter boots, heavy coats, axes, journals, food, and the central, life-saving stove. All were abandoned. Outside the tent, 10 sets of footprints, bare feet clad only in socks, and a single boot, led a confusing trail downhill, away from the shelter and towards a dark line of forest nearly 1.5 miles away. The prints indicated an urgent, uncontrolled flight. The first 2 bodies, those of Yuri Trivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko, were discovered 1 mile downhill, beneath a large, isolated cedar tree. They were bare feet and wearing only underwear and light layers. Their hands were scraped raw, consistent with climbing the tree, perhaps for a lookout, or in a desperate attempt to retrieve materials. The branches of the cedar were broken to a height of 5 meters. They had been exposed to the extreme elements long enough to be frozen solid, embracing each other for a final, futile warmth. 3 more bodies, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, were found along the ridge between the cedar and the abandoned tent. They seemed to have died in various stages of a crawl, desperately trying to return to their shelter and their abandoned gear. Their final frozen positions suggested a futile, agonizing struggle against the elements. Kolmogorova had visible injuries consistent with a severe impact to her head. Slobodin's skull was fractured. But it was the discovery of the final 4 bodies 2 months later, buried under 4 meters of snow in a deep forest ravine, that transformed the case from a tragic accident to a terrifying mystery. These 4, Ludmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thaboks-Brinols, and Alexander Kolovatov, bore injuries that defied belief. Nikolai Thaboks-Brinols had a major skull fracture. Semyon Zolotaryov and Ludmila Dubinina had horrific, symmetrical ribcage fractures, crushed with a force that the pathologist, Dr. Boris Vozrozhenny, later estimated as equivalent to a high-speed car crash. And, most disturbingly, Ludmila Dubinina was found with her tongue and eyes missing. There were no external signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds on their bodies,
and the thick clothing they were wearing was undamaged. The force that killed them was internal. It was blunt trauma, inflicted with massive pressure without leaving a mark on the skin. Furthermore, samples of the clothing from 2 of the victims registered significant levels of radiation. When questioned, investigators could offer no rational explanation for the presence of radioactive material on the garments of a student hiking group in the middle of nowhere. The conclusion of the autopsies remained an agonizing paradox. The hikers died from hypothermia and inexplicable, massive internal trauma. The investigation was officially closed in May 1959. The verdict, a compelling, unknown force. The files were immediately classified and sealed, not to be seen again for 30 years. Part 4.
The theories: cover-up or catastrophe. For decades, the phrase compelling unknown force has been the only official explanation, giving rise to endless speculation and 3 major competing theories, each attempting to reconcile the horrifying forensic evidence with the silent mountain. Theory 1. The Avalanche theory, the state's compromise. In 2019, the Russian government reopened the case and concluded, once again, that the cause was a small slab avalanche. The idea is that the snowpack shifted and frightened the hikers, forcing them to slash their way out of the tent and flee. However, this explanation struggles under the weight of physical evidence. No significant avalanche debris was ever found on the slope, which was far too shallow for a typical slide. Furthermore, the tent was still standing, anchored by the skis, and still partially visible. If an avalanche had struck, it would have buried the tent, not left it standing with a neatly sliced exit. Crucially, Dyatlov's team were expert mountaineers. They would never have camped on a known dangerous path, and they would have known how to survive a minor snow shift. Most researchers who have studied the original files reject this explanation as a convenient but ultimately flimsy political conclusion. Theory 2. Military experiments, the conspiracy of silence. This is the theory of the cover-up. During the 1950s, the Soviet military was known to conduct secret tests in the remote Ural region, including high-altitude parachute mines and experimental pressure explosives. Proponents of this theory point to the following facts. The hikers' clothing tested positive for radiation. The crushed rib cages and shattered skulls matched the effects of a severe pressure wave or blast trauma, not a natural injury. And witnesses from a settlement 50 kilometers away reported seeing strange flying spheres and bright luminous lights in the sky on the night of the incident. In this scenario, a military test went catastrophically wrong, producing a sudden, terrifying pressure wave, or perhaps a burst of light and sound that forced the panic-stricken hikers to flee their tent. The Soviet government, eager to protect highly sensitive programs, then orchestrated a swift investigation and classification, fabricating the unknown compelling force to shield the truth. The injuries of the final 4, found deep in the ravine, may have been caused by their own frantic attempt to shelter from the blast. Theory 3. Infrasound panic, the scientific mystery. Finally, there is the scientific anomaly. What if the killer was the mountain itself? A rare meteorological phenomenon known as the Kármán vortex street can create powerful, low-frequency sound waves called infrasound. These waves are inaudible to the human ear, yet they interact violently with the human brain. The effects of exposure to intense infrasound are well documented. Extreme, overwhelming anxiety, uncontrollable panic, hallucinations, and an unbearable sense of impending, inescapable doom. Did the howling wind, funneling over the ridge, generate a terrifying frequency that drove the experienced hikers instantly insane? Did they cut their way out of the tent in a shared psychotic flight response, only to suffer fatal injuries in the freezing chaos? This theory powerfully explains the panic and the irrational decision to flee. However, it still fails to fully account for the massive, non-traumatic blunt force injuries, the missing soft tissues, and the traces of radioactivity. Conclusion: a record that remains shadowed. More than 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass remains one of the coldest, darkest, and most frustrating mysteries in modern history. 9 young lives, a tent cut open from within, unexplainable blunt force injuries,
radiation, and a government too quick to seal the truth behind bureaucratic silence. The mountain remains silent. The snow has long covered the tracks, and the definitive answers may truly lie buried forever beneath the frozen earth of the Mountain of the Dead. But one thing is certain: something powerful, something terrifying, and something that violated every known rule of survival and forensics happened on that cold slope in 1959. It took the lives of 9 people who never should have died, and left behind a legacy of fear and unanswered questions that will endure for generations. This is the Shadowed Record, and the Dyatlov mystery remains fiercely unsolved.